Someone asked me recently why their team might not be delivering value, and there's so many things that could go into that. And so I thought I'd put together this little video basically talking through what are the reasons why your team might not be delivering the value you want. Maybe it's not going at the speed you want, maybe it's focused on the wrong things, maybe it's just not delivering incrementally. So what are those things that are happening? What are the potential reasons why it might not be delivering? So let's dive into this real fast. Starting off, there's a few different reasons why this might be happening. Number one, your team might be operating in a waterfall environment. If that's the case, well, there's a bit you can do, but hopefully that's pretty obvious. That could be a problem. If you're operating in a waterfall environment, you are necessarily not doing work incrementally, not delivering incrementally, not changing according to priorities. That's the definition of what waterfall is. I'm not going to go into all the details behind it, but suffice it to say there's a lot of information about this. There's a growing movement to try to make waterfall sound like it's a viable project management alternative. It's not. Number two, the team could be operating as a cargo cult. So some people call it Scrum, but it's Scrum, but we do X, Y, and Z. So that could be a problem. You may be having priorities change mid-sprint. You might have some gates and obstacles getting in your way, and your team members may need training and education. So what do these apply? Let's dive through. They kind of go in order. If you aren't operating in an agile environment in the first place, none of these others are going to matter. So let's dive into these first. Is your team operating in a waterfall environment? Here's some tests. Do you have project managers instead of Scrum Masters and product owners? That's a pretty obvious one. The rest of these go back to the Agile Manifesto, and this is a good litmus test against the Agile Manifesto. Does your organization resort to using process and tools to solve problems? If you need to solve a problem, does somebody immediately say, oh, there's this new tool? Okay, that's not what we look for. We want individuals and interaction solving problems because most of our problems are people problems. They're not technology problems. Does your organization prefer comprehensive documentation over working software? Does your organization refer to a contract when there's an issue rather than collaborating with your customer? And does your organization continue to follow a static plan that was defined rather than responding to the changes that occur just as a regular part of business? So these are good litmus tests. These shouldn't take much discussion. Teams basically know what's going on here. So this is a good litmus test to see if you're even conforming to that. If you are, how do you get out of a waterfall environment? Well, the short answer is hire a really good Enterprise Agile Coach or Agile Transformation Coach. If you need a recommendation, let me know. It's not something I do, but it's something that I know several people that are really, really good at this work. But you need to make sure you get a good one. If you've never done one of these before, you do not have the knowledge to hire a good one. You're going to need to find someone you trust to find a good person for you. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you don't know how to do this, you have exactly zero knowledge in finding somebody that can do this. Beyond that, a good Enterprise Agile Coach is going to work with you to start small. You're going to focus on one team first. Work that over time and then start growing that out to other teams, building that out. And there's several ways to do that. You want to build an agile culture in the organization. You want to provide training, and you're going to need to plan on some employee turnover. The reality is there are people that do not want to operate in an agile environment. You're going to need to find that out. And you won't necessarily know that ahead of time. Heck, they won't necessarily know that ahead of time. Is the team operating as a cargo cult? So cargo cult being, hey, we're going to emulate what we see, but we're not actually understanding the principles or values behind it. So are your daily stand-ups, or AKA your Scrum meetings, are they rote and boring? Or we talk about the same thing every day? That's an indicator. It's not necessarily a red flag, but it's at least an indicator. Do people strictly adhere to role definitions? Do people dig in and say, well, this is my job? Well, okay, but we need to be collaborative. Are people outside of the team using agile metrics to assess team members? That's a big no-no. Do demonstrations occur without customers? Are you just demonstrating to other people in the organization? Or are you demonstrating to customers, but they never give you feedback? That's an indicator. Does the team reject changes to priorities from the business? Uh-oh, big red flag. And does the team never change anything after their retrospectives? So if any of these are true, it's a flag. You want to ask yourself, is this happening on a regular basis? If several of these are happening, then yeah, your team really isn't getting what Scrum and Agile and maybe Kanban, what these Agile methodologies are really all about. So how do you get out of a cargo cult mindset? Well, you find a really good Scrum Master. An average Scrum Master isn't going to help a team that's struggling. You need somebody that's really, really good. You're going to need more of a senior to help that team get out of the slump in which they are. So find a really, really good Scrum Master. Again, this is not something I do, but it's certainly something I can help you find if you're interested in that. There's a number of great Scrum Masters with whom I've worked, and so I'd be happy to make a connection there. Focus at the team level, not the organization level. So this is about a team-by-team basis. Even if it's happening on 4 out of your 5 teams, you still need to focus on the team level for this kind of an issue. This is not an organizational issue. That's a waterfall thing. This is team by team. Each team is going to have their own obstacles for getting there. You need to reinforce your agile culture that you are adopting inside your organization. Provide some training on this. And again, you may have some turnover on an individual team. There may be a person or two that just doesn't want to embrace these ideas. And if that's the case, it's best to part ways and help them find a job somewhere else where they're going to be happy. Our priorities changing mid-sprint. So here's a quick indication, and this doesn't take a lot of questions. Most of the teams kind of know what's going on. Are you measuring your stories planned versus stories completed? If you're not, you may not have the evidence you need to know this. So make sure you're tracking that. There's several ways to do this. I'm not going to tell you exactly which way is right, but do it somehow and then improve that over time. Is your average over a few sprints, is your mean of unplanned work over 5 to 10%? 5% or less is really, really accurate. In fact, you may not be taking enough experimentation. If it's more than 10% on average, then there may be a lot of fly-in work and a lot of changes in priority. The stories regularly roll out of a sprint when new stories roll in. In other words, we're not finishing the work that we planned. New work is coming in and blowing up the sprint. What can you do in this situation? Well, the main thing that you can do as a team is own it. I never want to make recommendations where you wait on somebody else to change. As the saying goes, if in order to solve your problem, you need someone else to change, you do not understand your problem. So make room for these changes. If this is happening on a regular basis, create some space in your sprint during sprint planning. Create some placeholder stories. Maybe you add points to those. And so as fly-in work comes in, you can decrement that down or maybe even remove the placeholder. That's a technique. Another technique might be to only plan to 90%, 80%, 50%, I don't know. Figure out what's happening on a regular basis. Create space. You still want some predictability in what you're planning and what you're delivering, but you also need to accommodate changes that happen. So those are the primary things that teams can do that's in their control. Also, make your unplanned work metrics highly visible. If this is happening on a regular basis, make sure you're sharing this out with others. Share it out with your product group, share it out with your management group. Make sure people are aware that this high level of churn is affecting you. There may or may not be anything they can do, but transparency is huge. At least let people know why they might be seeing some of the metrics they're seeing. And then finally, you can negotiate with your product owner to see if the roadmap can stabilize. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can't, but at least have the conversation. If you're in a very volatile market and it's a new market, it's a budding market, maybe you're truly doing a to-market MVP, a minimum viable product, where you're testing it out and it's a lean startup model and you're really trying to figure out how things can work, you're going to have a lot of churn. You're going to learn things quickly. You're going to need to adapt to those things quickly. If it's a very well-established product, you would hope that the roadmap settles down a little bit. So it just kind of depends on where things are. But at least have the conversation with your product owner to understand where is that and what is there anything your product owner can do with the stakeholders and the product managers. Are gates and obstacles getting in the team's way? This one is incredibly common. So let's walk through some of the things that might be happening here that'll give you an indication of hey, maybe we have a problem. Does your team have a pull request process? Don't get me started on PRs. I'm not a fan of them in general. But is it a PR process that requires reviewers outside the team? If you do, you've got a major problem. You got to stop that now. Cut it out. Get it out of there. Does your team have to wait on any other person or team before pushing code to any environment? Even if it's just one environment, you have a problem. The one caveat is you should absolutely wait on your product group to bless a release before it gets into the hands of users. Whether that's a physical release or you're doing it with feature flags or something along those lines, blue-green deployments, however you want to do it, your product group should absolutely have final say on whether or not something gets into the hands of your users. Beyond that, if it's somebody outside of product, it's somebody outside of your PO or your PM, you have a problem and you need to figure out how to remove that dependency. Does your team have to wait on the availability of someone outside the team, or maybe somebody that's half-time? Maybe it's an architect that's on 3 different teams, for example, before it can work on any given piece of work. It doesn't have to be all the work, but if there's some work that the team can't work on without somebody else, you have a gating problem, you have an obstacle problem. Does your organization require a change management board or an architecture review board approval before the team can work or deploy their work? So any of these are bad. These are really, really bad. I cannot stress these enough. A lot of these organizations put them in place in order to, quote unquote, improve quality or control things, but they never do the intended outcome. You never really control quality. All you do is slow down the pace of things so that you feel like you're not releasing as many issues into production. That's the reality. So what can you do? Treat people that act as your gatekeepers and obstacles as you would any other stakeholder. In other words, talk with them, understand what they need, build systems that meet their needs, and deliver that to them. Demonstrate that. That's exactly what you do. Over time, as you build trust, then ask, can we remove the obstacle or the gate? That's the idea. They're just any other stakeholder. Maybe it's an architect. Maybe it's somebody in security. Maybe it's somebody in your DevOps group, which, don't get me started on DevOps. That's not a separate team. DevOps is the integration of Dev and Ops. But I digress. So whoever that is that's imposing an obstacle or a gate, work with them. Understand what their requirements are. They're just a stakeholder like anybody else. Build stories that make them happy. Build that trust and tear down the gate once that trust has been built. My second recommendation is absolutely avoid creating any dependency with any other team for any reason whatsoever. Never be dependent on another team. This is so critical, and yet it's so easy to violate. Avoid coding standards that require other teams' involvement. Your team's coding standards are your team's coding standards, and that requires regular conversations, rather public, open code reviews with each other, not PRs. You need to talk about your coding standards because those coding standards are going to change over time. Avoid deployment standards and processes that require teams to conform to the product, that require your product to conform to some arbitrary decision by the organization. Each product has a very specific way it needs to be deployed out. It needs to be tested, it needs to be hosted, it needs to be run, it needs to be released. Your team is responsible for that. So make sure that something in the organization isn't getting in your team's way of delivering high value to your end users and your customers. Avoid testing cycles that require other teams or departments. As Robert C. Martin said, Uncle Bob, QA should find nothing. The team should own quality. Once it gets out to another group, again, that's just making sure that you build that trust that your team is building high quality software. And then finally, avoid long-lived branches. Long-lived branches necessarily violate continuous integration of CI/CD. Continuous integration is about continuously integrating code into a mainline branch. Trunk-based development, master development, mainline development, these are all different names for the same thing. Avoid long-lived branches. I'm going to get some hate on this, but I don't care. All right, do your team members need training and education? Really, if none of the other issues are major problems, then this is likely the problem. Does your team prefer delivering in technical chunks rather than functional user stories? In other words, horizontal versus vertical slices. Does your team have architecture and design choices that are hard for them to explain to others, including business? Good architecture and good design should reflect the business space. It should not be separate. Technical domain is not a separate domain from the business. Technology serves the business. So if your team can't explain the architecture to your business people, as a general rule, you have a problem. Does the team avoid TDD, test-driven development, or automated tests in general? That's a problem. Does each team member work on the same kind of work each sprint? Are people siloed? Hey, I'm the stored procedure guy. I'm the cloud girl, whatever it is, right? So that kind of silo, that's a bad thing. Does the team never seek to introduce new technologies, tools, design patterns, or approaches, especially after retros? That's a red flag. Does the team stay silent when previewing stories? The team should be highly active. They're trying to understand the spirit of a story. If they're just reading the story and throwing out a number, they're not really diving in. They're not engaged. They're not understanding the business. These are all red flags. Your team needs training and education. How can you provide training and education? So there's a few things you can do. Train on CI and CD. This is critical. Everybody needs to understand CI/CD practices. Train on TDD. Everyone needs to understand the value of test-driven development. It's not about tests, but it creates regression testing suites, which is hugely valuable. I cannot stress this one enough. Make sure everyone's trained on the Gang of Four design patterns. There's 23 of them under 3 categories. Everybody knows that, right? Also train on refactoring. Everybody should understand the basic library of refactorings. Martin Fowler has written a great book on this. And if your team members haven't read this, make that your next book in your book club. Cross-train all of your team members on the technologies you use in your team. And then let's talk about hiring real fast. Hire for ownership and responsibility traits. You want to make sure you're infusing at least 1 or 2 people on the team that take ownership and responsibility from the get-go. They should reflect that and make sure that everybody's adopting that ownership and responsibility traits. Never have a team that has no one that takes responsibility. You'll never progress. You'll never grow. That's just the reality of the situation. It doesn't mean you can't have a mix of those individuals, but you have to have at least 1 or 2 people that are, you can call it dominant, but really people that are willing to take ownership. You can interview for that. You can find people like that. Find at least 1 or 2 people, make sure they're on that team. And then hire somebody that exemplifies the right behaviors, a true senior, somebody that really understands how to do all these practices and not only can exemplify them, but ideally can help teach them. Finally, if none of those are going to be able to work for you, ask me for help. This is where Lucent Terry Academy comes in. So if there's something I can do to help you out, give me a call, send me an email, chat at lucentterry.com or 817-704-0300. Give me a call, send me an email. I'm happy to help. I won't charge you for just a conversation. So if you're just looking to try to understand a little bit more about where my school can fit in, where my training can fit in, where my students can fit in, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. I hope this helps. Again, I just wanted to address what can you do with your team if they're not delivering the value. This is basically the review of it. Please leave some comments. Please leave me a note. Hopefully you found it helpful.